Hey, this is Tasha with Persimmon Honey Hollow, just getting ready to make some soap for the first time in probably a year. First thing I'm going to do is go to a lye calculator online at thesage.com. That's my favorite one, only because it's my very first one and I love its simplicity. Go up to the corner here up in the right-hand side where it says calculators and click lye calculator, and there you go. You've got your lye calculator ready to have all your input in. First thing you're going to do is title your recipe. The next thing you're going to do after you name your recipe is choose ounces, pounds, grams, whatever units you want to do your measurements in. If you have a very small recipe, you're going to choose grams. If you have a very large recipe, you're going to choose ounces or pounds. Under that, you have your lye type. So it's going to be either sodium hydroxide, which is what you use for a normal bar soap, or potassium hydroxide, which you would use for a liquid soap. And if you just keep on scrolling down, you'll see this nice big selection of oils. You can choose any oil or combination of oils that you want to use. The ones that I'm using in this recipe are lard, coconut, and safflower oil. Then come down here and click Calculate. And that brings us to our calculation page. The first thing I want you to know is up here it tells you how much liquid you need, either goat milk or cow milk or wine or whatever it is you're using. That's the amount of liquid you're going to use, somewhere between 10 and 15 ounces. If you use less liquid, it's going to come to trace faster. If you use more liquid, it's going to be a little bit runnier at first. Over here on the right-hand side of the table, you're going to see your lye amounts. You choose how much of a superfat you want, which is how much unsaponified oil you want to be in your soap. And I like to keep right in the middle of the green. I figure if the green is our target, let's go for the middle of the target and not play around the edges. So I'm going to choose about somewhere between 6 and 7%, which means I've got a little leeway. If I choose a 6% and I go over on my lye, then I'd be closer to a 5%. And if I underdose my lye, it's going to be closer to a 7%. And just right in there, all it's going to do if you have a little mistake while measuring your lye, as long as it's not a big mistake, or if your scale doesn't go to hundredths of an ounce, mine only goes to a 20th of an ounce, all that's going to do is that's going to move you a little bit up or down the superfat scale. But if you're aiming for the middle of the green, it's not going to move you very far just by having a very small change. Down here at the bottom, it shows your current batch and how much is there. And I have a total of 40.25 ounces of oil, but then it tells me that this should yield somewhere between 50 and 54 ounces of soap, which makes sense because that's going to slide you up and down based on how much liquid you've put into it. If you put more liquid, you will have more soap. If you have less liquid, you will have less soap when you're putting it in the mold. So here's my coconut oil melting in with my lard. Those are 2-to-1 ratio lard to coconut. And since those are not liquid, I just put them in to melt together. And then I make sure it's well mixed before I ladle them out. And then that's just on low. Where's my low? It's like way down there. It's on a low setting. And there's my goat milk frozen into a couple of big blocks. I know what you're thinking. That looks like more than 10 to 15 ounces. And it is. This is going to be for a triple batch. So I've got somewhere between like 40 and 45 ounces. I was a little short, but like I said, it's a forgiving recipe. Having a little bit less liquid just means that your soap is not as runny and it sets up a little bit faster. Okay, so we just sprinkle a little bit of lye over the top of the milk. Just kind of let that melt in a little bit. I like to do it in these block forms because I think it stays colder longer. And if all of my milk melts before I have incorporated all of the lye, then I just put the bowl in a larger bowl that has ice cubes in it, and that'll kind of cool it from the bottom. So you see that meltiness happening. It's also a really psychotically humid day today. But as this melts, it just gets to sit on top of that ice block. So it dissolves, but the heat given off by the dissolving will keep it, will melt the next layer. You see how that gets all shiny and melty. And I use a slotted spoon because I feel like then I can go, I don't know, as it melts more, I can get it stirred better. And I'm less likely to chuck up as much at my face if I accidentally flick it. But as a general rule, I'm not too worried that I'm going to flick it. I'm just stirring that little melted bit. And this is just under 17 ounces of lye that I am dissolving into about 45 ounces of goat milk. So this is something I wanted you to see here. This yellowing of the lye milk is because I got ahead of myself and got more lye in there than the coldness of the blocks could keep up with. So the milk started melting more quickly. And so now I'm just trying to get it cooled back down. Doesn't really need an ice bath yet because I have 2 large blocks of ice still sitting in here. I just need to have it mixed better, which I was not doing because I was too busy filming. But that yellowing is what you're trying to avoid in goat milk soap because it can discolor the soap to an orange. Goat milk soap is never going to be gleaming white. It's always going to be a little bit off-white, more of a cream color because it's made with milk. But the big thing is that you just try to keep it cold so that these sugars don't caramelize. It doesn't ruin the soap. It just makes it harder to get a good color out of it because it's a little darker. But I've had it yellow this yellow before without much incident. And also I'm going to be making vanilla beans, so it doesn't matter anyway because that thing's going to discolor to a really dark brown because of the vanilla in it. So it's not a non-issue on this particular soap. The last of the lye is already in, so now we're just helping it to stay cool and get that last bit of milk melted. Another thing to remember or to be aware of when doing goat milk is that, or really any milk probably, is this stuff right over here. It looks like undissolved chunks of lye, but it's actually not. It's the fat in the milk already beginning to saponify. It's emulsify, saponify, whatever. It's linking up with, it's reacting with the lye. And so you get these little soap batter chunks in your milk. And you know that there's a difference between those and the undissolved lye because when you mush them, they don't go crunch, crunch, crunch. Lye goes crunch, 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 and that's why we do a lot of stirring along the bottom and pressing the back of the spoon because we're looking for anything that feels gritty like sugar. That would be undissolved lye that needs to be worked until it's dissolved. But the soap chunks are just soft. Time to measure the fragrance oil. So, confession time. Here is my big mistake of the day. That is my 10-pound loaf mold behind the scale. It has been lined and waiting for me to get around to making a big batch of soap for months now. Today is the day. I have my oils melting. I have dissolved my lye in the milk. And once I was well into this process and fully committed, I realized that I had actually lined the mold with 3 liners to make 3 small loaves instead of 1 big one. So now I have to decide on 2 more fragrances and split the batch into 3. Yes, it would have been easier to just go ahead and make the 10-pound loaf and then split it across all 3 liners. But that feels like it would have been a waste of all the effort that I put in lining those molds separately. So now I am making 3 different soaps. The first fragrance is Vanilla Bean by Nature's Garden, and the other 2 soaps will be scented with fresh brewed coffee and Pearamel, also by Nature's Garden. And I will put a link to their site in the description below. Ooh, pro tip for the absent-minded. Put your fragrance oil in your mold until you're ready for it, so if you forget to mix it in, it's there to remind you when you go to pour. All right, now I have all my liners reinforced, and this is my 3 soap setup in the large mold. Okay, here we are back at the scale, measuring out the melted lard and coconut oils. And then adding in the safflower, which is already a liquid oil, so it doesn't need to be heated up at all. Now we're going to add the lye milk to the oils. Please pardon my pouring technique. The one-handed filming pour is not a challenge I have yet mastered. Right away, we start to see the beginning of emulsification where the lye and the oils start to bind together, so let's blend that up a bit. We are at Thin Trace. Here's where a lot of beginners get confused. Thin Trace is still a very liquid, runny soap, which is useful if you're separating layers or doing different colors. It's like a runny gravy. To know if you've blended enough, you want to look around the edges and see if there are swirls of unblended oil like this. If so, you need to blend just a little bit more. I'm not separating anything, so we're going to blow right on past this and go to a medium trace. Medium trace is more like a cake batter. Not pancake batter, that would be too thick. It leaves a trail through the batter when you run your mixer through it. It's hard to differentiate on camera, but these trails are not unblended oil. They come from the texture of the thickened batter. A lot of beginners think they have to blend this far just to be at trace, and that medium trace is somewhere beyond that. No, this is medium trace. So we'll just blend on a little more to get to thick trace for you guys to get a look at that. Thick trace is like a pudding. It's great for textured soap tops. Unfortunately, I realized after I had blended this far that I still needed to add my fragrance, which will require some additional mixing, so I better get that added in and mix it in by hand. Like I said, it's been a year since I've made soap, so naturally the best time to film yourself doing a thing is when you are very out of practice. We're just looking to get this fragrance oil well incorporated before the batter thickens up too much. So we just kind of fold it in at first to avoid splashing, and then we can get a little bit more aggressive with our stirring. You want to add the fragrance before you're done mixing because you still need to mix once you add it. Once it's well incorporated, we can get it into the mold. That looks about right, so I think we're going to go ahead and mold this soap now. Just look at that thick, beautiful batter. Remember that I reinforced the inside edges by putting wooden blocks inside the center liner. That's going to help prevent the weight of the soap from pushing out too much and warping the whole loaf. Another thing to keep in mind with a thick batter like this is that while it's great for shaping a textured top, it also has a tendency to get air pockets if you're not careful. Make sure as you're pouring that it spreads fairly evenly, because tapping the mold on the counter isn't going to be enough to settle something this thick. There's the Pearamel. Yes. Pearamel, fresh brewed coffee, and over here is Vanilla Bean. This one's going to be really dark, almost black. It'll be dark brown. This one will be a medium brown, and I think this one will also be a medium brown when it's all said and done. Okay, let's look at these soaps again. This is gel phase, and it's the result of heat given off during the saponification process. This soap is basically cooking itself, even though I've added no additional heat. Gel phase makes colors more vibrant, so a lot of soapers put their soap in a slightly warm oven to encourage the gel. This soap has either been through gel and is cooling or is still warming up. Partial gel phase happens when the soap only gels in the middle. If the top of the loaf has already solidified while the inside is still heating up, that's how cracks can occur in the soap. To minimize cracking, you can insulate the loaf by covering it with a lid or wrapping it in a towel to slow the heat loss. This one stayed cool enough during the whole process that it has not gelled at all. If you're trying to keep your cold process cold, you can put soap in the refrigerator after you pour it, and that can help to inhibit gel phase, which is preferable if you're trying to keep a gleaming white soap. Gel phase or no gel phase doesn't matter to me today because these soaps are all naturally going to be a shade of brown. I'm not using any colors that need to pop or trying to preserve a creamy white that needs to stay cold in order to prevent darkening. It's been a couple of days now and the soap is solid enough to cut. I already did the first 2 loaves off camera, so now it's time to do the vanilla bean. Just using a paper towel to wipe off any bits of soap from the previous cut because you don't want to drag those through on the next cut. I usually make my soap in the drier months of fall and winter instead of the high humidity of summer, and I wasn't thinking about how the glycerin in the loaves was going to be attracting the water from the air. It made everything really slick, and I felt like I was struggling to grip the loaf as I unwrapped it. You can see it a little bit on the loaf and on my hands. 0 out of 10, do not recommend humid summer soaping. Soap is now placed on the cutter, centered, and we just want to press firmly but gently. And you hear those wires breaking through the bottom. And you just kind of press along to make sure that they're all in. And then we get to look and see what they look like on the inside. It's that rich pumpkin-y color. So on the outside, it's that dark, dark brown. And the inside is kind of orange. But it's not going to stay that way. So don't get any design ideas that this is some cool design that we can do. We cannot. The whole thing is going to be dark brown. It just needs to take time to catch up. And here are all those freshly cut soaps ready to go upstairs to the curing rack for about 6 to 8 weeks, and then they'll be ready for use. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.